When groups decide to move beyond a normal group life that simply lives according to the patterns of this world with a meeting placed on top of it, groups enter into a time of learning what it means to make a difference in the world. In other words, they learn to do mission and join God in His mission. This is not a time to adopt a program for becoming a group that is missional or a pattern that someone else prescribes for you. Nor is it simply a strategy to focus on because of being external or outreach oriented. Instead, this is a process by which a group of people learn how the Spirit of God is moving through them and learn to join God in what He is doing to make a difference. It is a process of learning to put into practice a lifestyle that is distinctively godlike, in other words. In John 13, we read about how Jesus washed the feet of the disciples and about how Peter didn't want Jesus to do this. In this passage, we discover that God really looks like someone who serves. God does not come to us with power and bigness and strength. He doesn't overwhelm us with Himself. He comes to us as a servant, as one who lowers himself to the point of an ugly and cruel cross. He comes to us washing our feet because God knows that the only way to bring true change, that the only way to really make a difference in the world is to love people. We too often assume that the way to make a difference in the world is by attaining power and using that power to help others. This is exactly what Peter assumed. He thought Jesus was going to come as a conquering king, and he was not going to let Jesus wash his feet. He wasn't going to let Jesus lower himself to that level. And Jesus said, if you want any of me, you're going to let me do this. You see, we learn who God is when we allow Jesus to wash our feet, because that reveals true power. But when we achieve power and try to make a difference by the world's standards and try to change things with power and lording over people, we will be forever caught in a trap of maintaining that power by the standards that the world sets for us. Jesus said to the disciples after He washed their feet, He said to them, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher, and you call me Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also wash the feet of other people. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I say to you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. A new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Jesus was demonstrating the rhythms of God's love, and then taught the disciples that these were the same rhythms or patterns of living that they would embody and use to make a difference in the world. In other words, they were to go about God's mission in the same way that Jesus went about God's mission. The same way that Jesus came and did life was the way He wanted the disciples to do life. These are rhythms or patterns that He wove into the disciples as they followed Him. And when we move into a group that is being more than an ordinary group, we are learning the patterns of God, the rhythms of God, and we're learning to embody them, not just as individuals, and not just as a church as a whole with 300 or 400 people in the room, but as smaller communities who are doing life together and learning how to do this. And there are three basic rhythms that I found and discovered that groups do to make a difference in the world. Three kind of broader categories. The first is missional communion. This is a way of encountering God together that shapes our life patterns so that we are no longer shaped by those of the world, but changed from the inside out. Thereby, because of that, change from the inside out, we can impact other people. The second is missional relating. This is a way of experiencing God's love together. This isn't just about me and God. This is about how we experience God together as a community that is in contrast to the typical relational patterns of our culture. This is about servanthood with one another and self-sacrifice and learning to give our lives for each other. The third rhythm or pattern is that of missional engagement. It's a way of engaging people in our neighborhoods and a way of loving friends and next door neighbors, family members, and coworkers that displays God's love in tangible ways. And the reason I don't use the word evangelism here, this is because this isn't about just going out and trying to win them for Jesus. This is about actually loving them so that we are for their benefit and we're for their sake, so we can love them for who they are and allow them to be wooed by God's love. That's how we engage people. These are ways that God sends forth his love into the world. And in other words, this is how he thrusts out the ways of God to redeem all of creation. It's not just to save little groups of people here and there. This is a way that God is changing the world and making a difference through us. As we as people, as little communities, grow in our ability to embody these rhythms, we grow in our ability to participate in what God is doing in the world. The missional life, or this difference-making way, arises out of our overlapping of these three rhythms. It's like three circles, in other words. It's like communion, relating, and engagement are three circles that overlap one another, and the missional life manifests at the point of their overlap. They're not just three separate things. They're three things that overlap one another, and out of that center is where difference-making living happens. As we take on these three rhythms, our lives take on a distinctive godlike form as a community, and things in this world around us change. God changes us and makes a difference in our world through us as we grow in these rhythms.